He night Sophia Carleton's life changed. She was standing on a stone terrace in the cold, holding a glass of champagne she had not touched, listening to her cousin's laugh carry up through the dark garden below. She had known that laugh since she was 8 years old. The particular musical rise of it that Honoria Vance deployed when she wanted to be heard, when she wanted a room, or a garden, or a man, to know she was the most alive thing in it. Sophia stood very still. Below, the lantern strung along the rose hedge threw pale gold light across the gravel path. And in that light, unmistakably, were two people standing close, closer than cold air and propriety permitted. And one of them was the man whose name Sophia had been carrying beside her own for 3 months. She did not lean forward. She did not make a sound. She watched a small white flower fall from Honoria's hair and land on the pale gravel. And then she turned, walked back through the glass doors, smiled at the orchestra leader, thanked her hostess for a lovely evening, went upstairs to the bedchamber she had been given to dress in, and wrote one letter. By the time morning light crossed the second window of the room, she was in a hired carriage on the road to Hampstead, and the letter was on the pillow. The drive took 40 minutes. Sophia sat with her hands folded in her lap and did not weep. She was not, she discovered, a woman who wept in carriages. She was a woman who counted things. The number of times she had told herself she was being ungenerous. The number of dinners at which she had watched Lionel's attention wander and attributed it to the natural restlessness of a man accustomed to being the most important person in every room. She had accepted the proposal at 33, believing, without ever quite saying it aloud, that the window of her life was closing. Her family had made that clear enough after the refusal at 25. The man she had suspected of wanting her fortune rather than herself. The man whose proposal she had declined and whose feelings she had apparently miscalculated, because her uncle had not forgiven her for it in 8 years. She had told herself that Lionel was different. She had been wrong, and she had, on some level, known it, and she had proceeded anyway. And that was the part that sat in her chest now like a stone she could not shift. Her godmother, Mrs. Eleanor Prentice, met her at the door in a dressing gown and did not ask a single question. She put Sophia in the blue bedroom, brought tea and left her alone. That was the whole of what Sophia needed from her that night. In the morning, she came downstairs and sat at the breakfast table. She ate toast. She drank coffee. She looked out at the garden, which was damp and gray and entirely indifferent to her circumstances, and she found this restful. Mrs. Prentice sat across from her and read the morning papers and offered no comment, which was why Sophia had come to her and not to anyone else. By midday, word had reached London. She knew this because Mrs. Prentice's housekeeper came to the sitting room with a particular expression, the expression of a woman who has heard something at the door that she has been instructed not to share. And by early afternoon, a note arrived from her uncle. He had written in the large, forward-leaning hand he used when he was angry, which was most of the time. "You will return to this house immediately. Your conduct is incomprehensible and will not be discussed at a distance. Your presence here is required before 4 o'clock. Sophia set the note on the table beside her coffee cup. She did not answer it. A second note arrived before evening, this one written in a cleaner, more formal hand. A secretary's hand. It bore the Ashbourne crest at the top, and requested, in language so carefully impersonal it had evidently been drafted by a solicitor, that Lady Sophia refrain from making any public statement regarding the engagement until the relevant parties had had opportunity to consult. It used the phrase, "the matter of the engagement," as though the engagement were a disputed invoice. She did not answer that one either. She went to Mrs. Prentice and asked for pen, paper, and a week. Mrs. Prentice gave her all three without asking what for. The week passed quietly. Sophia wrote letters she did not send, then burned them. She walked in the garden. She did not read the papers. She ate regular meals and slept more than she had slept in months, which told her something about what the engagement season had been costing her that she had not been willing to calculate. On the third morning, she woke at 5 and lay in the gray light and thought about the flower on the gravel and about the particular quality of her cousin's laugh and about the fact that Honoria had sat beside her at dinner 6 times in the past 3 months and had looked her in the eye every one of those times. She thought about this carefully, and at the end of the thinking, she understood that she was not only angry at Lionel. On the 4th day, a footman in Ashbourne livery arrived at the door. He carried a handwritten note, not typed, not dictated. The handwriting was small and precise and unfamiliar. She turned it over. The seal was the Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne's personal device, not the ducal crest. She broke it and read, "My dear Lady Sophia, I should be grateful for your company at Grosvenor Square at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. I am not writing to ask you to be reasonable. I am writing because I require your assistance, and because I believe you require mine. Come if you are willing. I shall understand if you are not. Adelaide, Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne." Sophia read it twice. Then she folded it and placed it in her pocket and went to tell Mrs. Prentice she would need the carriage in the morning. She arrived at Grosvenor Square prepared for the conventional appeal. She had dressed carefully, not in mourning, not in defiance, but in the plain dark blue that said she had not collapsed. And she had composed her face into the expression she had spent a decade perfecting, the expression that communicated composure without coldness, attentiveness without vulnerability. She was ready to be told to be sensible. She was ready to be told about the family name, about the damage already done, about the particular misery of being a woman who had acted on her own judgment and found herself alone on the other side of it. The dowager's morning room was smaller than she had expected. A low fire burned in the grate. The light through the tall windows was the weak silver light of late winter, and the room smelled of wood smoke and old paper. The dowager herself was a woman of perhaps 70, with white hair dressed simply and eyes that moved quickly and missed nothing. She was already seated when Sophia was shown in, and she rose only enough to indicate the chair across from her. "Sit down," the dowager said. She did not say it unkindly. Sophia sat. The dowager poured 2 cups of tea with her own hands, which Sophia noted. A duchess did not pour her own tea for a guest she intended to manage. She set 1 cup in front of Sophia and held the other herself, and said, without any preliminary at all, "Good for you. Now sit down. We have work to do." Sophia had already sat down. She did not point this out. She said carefully, "I am not certain what work you mean, Your Grace." "Then I will tell you." The dowager set her cup down. "I have suspected for the better part of 8 months that my son and your cousin have been conducting an affair. I have been unable to prove it to a standard that would withstand scrutiny, because the people who know the most about it are employed in my son's household and are therefore not at liberty to speak to me freely. I need a witness who was present at a direct act, who is of unimpeachable standing, and who cannot be persuaded to be managed. You are the only person in London who answers all 3 conditions." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "You are asking me to help you bring a case against your own son. I am asking you to help me establish the truth of a situation that has cost you your engagement, your reputation, and whatever peace of mind you had managed to accumulate." The dowager's voice was even. "I am also asking because it is the right thing to do. but I thought you might find the first reason more immediately persuasive. How long have you known? I have suspected. Known is a word I am not yet entitled to use. The dowager picked up her tea again. There is a difference. I intend to close that difference. I cannot do it alone. Sophia looked at the fire for a moment. Then she looked back at the dowager. Why are you doing this? She asked. He is your son. The dowager was quiet for a beat. When she answered, the evenness in her voice had not changed, but something behind it had shifted. Something that had been held carefully for a long time. Because 40 years ago, she said, I was in a position not entirely unlike yours. The circumstances were different. The outcome was not. And no one in that room did what I am proposing to do for you now. She paused. I have thought about that room for 40 years. I would prefer not to be the reason someone else does the same. Sophia did not speak immediately. She looked at the small, precise woman across from her, at the hands that had poured the tea without ceremony, at the eyes that had not once dropped away from hers. And she felt something shift in her own chest, not dramatically, not with any particular warmth, but with the quiet, specific sensation of a door she had not known was locked opening slightly. What would it require of me? She asked. Your testimony, your presence in London under my protection, your willingness to sit in this room with my solicitor and a man I trust and go through what you know, piece by piece, until we have assembled what I have been unable to assemble alone. The dowager held her gaze. It will be uncomfortable. It will take several weeks. Your uncle will be furious. There will be consequences you cannot fully anticipate. There are already consequences I did not anticipate, Sophia said. Yes, the dowager said. There are. She waited. Sophia picked up her tea. Tell me who the man is that you trust, she said, and I will give you my answer. His name was James Halton, and he arrived at the dowager's morning room on the second day, looking as though he had walked from somewhere rather than ridden, which turned out to be accurate. He had left his carriage 2 streets away, on the grounds that the air was useful for thinking. He was 38, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that looked like it had been used for some years and was better for it. He sat forward rather than back, which Sophia noticed immediately, and when the dowager introduced him, he looked at Sophia directly and said, I am sorry for what has happened to you. I want to say that plainly before we begin, because it matters, and because I suspect you have not heard it said plainly yet. Sophia said, No, I have not. Then I am saying it now. He opened the leather case he had brought with him and set 3 sheets of paper on the table. Shall we begin? They began. The dowager's solicitor, a dry, careful man named Mr. Ashford, attended the first meeting and the 3 that followed. What emerged over those 2 weeks was a picture assembled from pieces none of them had held alone. The housekeeper at Ashbourne House, a woman of 30 years' service who had approached the dowager through a back channel 2 months prior, had found a slipper belonging to Honoria Vance in Lionel's dressing room on the morning of the 3rd of November. She had said nothing at the time because she had no one to say it to. There was a footman named Greer who had been present in the garden the night of the ball, and who had, James had since established, received a payment of £8 the following morning from an account traceable, with some persistence, to Honoria's personal allowance. 2 housemaids could place Honoria at Ashbourne House on 4 dates she had told her own family she was in the country visiting a school friend. Sophia sat through each of these disclosures and said nothing until she had something useful to say. When she did speak, James listened. More than listened, he asked her to continue. He wrote down what she said. He argued with her when he disagreed and conceded when she was right. And he did not once suggest that the harder questions might be better left to the men. By the end of the second week, she had stopped being surprised by this and had started simply relying on it, which was a different thing entirely. The external campaign against her began in the third week. She heard about it first from Mrs. Prentice, who had been at a dinner where a woman she trusted had reported hearing Sophia described as nervous, unstable, and prone to the kind of emotional misreading that made a woman unsuited to the management of a large household. The same formulation, emotional misreading, appeared at 2 other dinner tables within 4 days. It was too consistent to be coincidence. James, when she told him, did not look surprised. "Honoria is methodical," he said. They were sitting on opposite sides of the long table in the dowager's morning room, and he had set down his pen to look at her directly. She is not operating on instinct. She planned the garden scene. Greer was paid in advance. The payment was made 3 days before the ball, which means she knew where you would be and when. Sophia was quiet for a moment. "She knew I would go onto the terrace. She knows you. She has known you since you were children." He said it without softening it. "She timed it so you would see. The departure before dawn, the hired carriage, the empty room, that was supposed to brand you as the unstable bride who fled without explanation. She expected you to disappear. She expected to step into the wedding within the year." Something moved through Sophia. Not grief, not quite fury, but something that had the texture of both and the temperature of neither. She thought of Honoria's face across dinner tables, composed and attentive and entirely false. And she thought of the 8-year-old girl who had shared her nursery. And she understood that those two things had never been as separate as she had believed. "She has been planning this for some time," she said. "At least 2 years," James said. "Possibly longer." Her uncle, meanwhile, had been quietly approached by Lionel's solicitors with terms for a clean annulment. The language was careful, the offer was not ungenerous, and it was predicated entirely on Sophia's silence. Her uncle wrote to her with barely concealed urgency. She wrote back in 2 sentences, acknowledging that she had received his letter and that she required more time. She did not mention the morning room in Grosvenor Square. She did not mention James Halton. It was at the end of one of these long working sessions, the 5th or 6th she had lost count, that James reached across the table to hand her her gloves as she rose to leave. Her fingers closed around the kid leather. His hand was steady. Hers was not, and they both knew it, and neither of them said anything about it. And she walked to the carriage and sat in it all the way back to Hampstead, thinking about the steadiness of his hand and what it meant that hers had not been. 3 weeks into the alliance, Honoria engineered the Bond Street encounter. It happened outside a milliner's on a Tuesday morning. Sophia was returning from an errand for Mrs. Prentice, a small domestic task, the kind that had begun to feel like an anchor in weeks that were otherwise entirely without ordinary routine. She was on the pavement when she heard her name spoken in the tone of conspicuous concern that Honoria had perfected over the course of a lifetime. The tone that contained pity and triumph in precisely equal measure, and presented them as the first alone. Sophia. Honoria had 2 companions with her, both women Sophia knew from 3 years of shared committee work and drawing-room visits. "My dear, you look so tired. Are you quite well? We have all been so worried." The companions turned slightly away, not rudely, but with the particular studied-in attention that communicated clearly that they had been primed for this and had chosen their position in advance. The pavement was busy. 3 people had already glanced over. Sophia stood very still, She was aware of the distance between what she wanted to say and what she was capable of saying in the middle of Bond Street on a Tuesday morning with witnesses on all sides. The gap between those two things was considerable, and she was standing in it, and her hands were entirely steady, and she was grateful for that much. She heard footsteps behind her, quick, deliberate, crossing the street at a pace that suggested purpose rather than coincidence. James appeared at her side, said nothing at all, placed her hand inside the crook of his elbow, and turned her so that her back was to Honoria in a single smooth movement. He walked her to the carriage at the corner. She got in. He got in after her. Inside, he released her hand. He looked at her once, and she looked back at him, and then he said, "She is afraid of you." Sophia considered this. She has a very confident way of showing it. "She does," he said, "because she needs you to believe she has already won. She is not." He held her gaze for a moment longer. "You know that." She looked out the window. The street moved past. "I know it," she said. "It is only that knowing it and feeling it are not the same thing, and sometimes the distance between them is rather large." He did not offer a reassurance she had not asked for. He said, "Yes, I know that distance." And then he looked out his own window, and they rode the rest of the way in a silence that was not uncomfortable. That evening, Sophia reported the incident to the Dowager, who listened without expression, noted it in her ledger with 3 words: deliberate public provocation, and moved the timeline of the planned reckoning forward by 1 week. The evening the case shifted was a late one. Mr. Ashford had gone home at 9. The Dowager had retired to her sitting room with a headache. Sophia and James remained at the long table in the morning room, working through a set of dated letters that had arrived from a contact of James's in the country. Letters that placed Honoria at Ashbourne House on 2 additional dates. The fire had burned low. The room smelled of ink and cold tea. At some point in the course of the evening, James set down his pen and said, without particular preamble, "I want to tell you something about why I am in this room." Sophia looked up from the letter she was reading. "6 years ago," he said, "there was a contested point in the Ashbourne succession. A question about the terms of the original title, whether certain conditions had been met. A solicitor I trusted told me the point could be pressed in my favor and that there was a reasonable prospect of success." He paused. "I chose not to press it." "Why?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. He turned his pen over in his fingers, a gesture she had come to recognize as the outward sign of his thinking. "My wife had died 4 months before. I was not in a condition to hold anything. That was the honest part of it." He set the pen down. The less honest part was that I was not certain I was the man for the title. I told myself it was grief. I told myself it was principle. I have spent 6 years wondering whether it was only fear." Sophia said nothing. She waited. "Lionel's conduct over the past months has answered the question I've been carrying," he said. "Not in the way I hoped, but it has answered it. I know now that my reluctance was not cowardice. But I also know that I will not test the answer by stepping aside again when stepping aside is wrong." He looked at her directly. "I want you to know that. I am committed to seeing this case through publicly, whatever it costs me in family standing. I am not doing it for the inheritance. I am doing it because what was done to you was deliberate, and because the people who did it are depending on everyone involved being too careful of their own position to say so." Sophia looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "That is the most honest thing anyone has said to me in 6 weeks." "It is the most honest thing I have said to anyone in 6 years," he said. Before either of them could speak again, the door opened and the dowager came in, her headache apparently resolved or overridden. She was carrying a bundle of letters tied with a dark ribbon, and she set them on the table between the two of them without ceremony. I retrieved these from a writing desk in the library at Ashbourne House during my visit last Thursday, she said. I am not proud of the method. I am entirely satisfied with the result. Sophia untied the ribbon. The letters were from Lionel to Honoria, dated, specific, spanning 22 months, beginning 8 months before Lionel had first called on Sophia's uncle to discuss the terms of the engagement. They were not ambiguous. They were not open to interpretation. The three of them sat with the letters on the table between them, and the fire burned down to coals, and no one spoke for a full minute. The case is winnable, Sophia said at last. Yes, the dowager said. It is. Honoria moved on 2 fronts in a single week, and both of them landed. The first Sophia heard about from Mrs. Prentice at breakfast, the charitable committee she had chaired for 4 years, the one that organized the distribution of winter relief to 3 parishes in the east of the city, had voted the previous afternoon to remove her from the chair. 2 of the committee's senior members had called separately on the other members in the days prior. The removal was reported the following morning in the social column of a paper that Sophia had always considered beneath her notice, and now found she was reading with her coffee cup halfway to her mouth, and her eyes very still on the page. She set the paper down. She finished her coffee. She went upstairs and wrote a letter to James and the dowager, and then came back down and ate the rest of her breakfast. The second blow arrived by the end of the week, in her uncle's handwriting. He had decided, citing the ongoing nature of the scandal and the distress to the family, to revoke the small bequest he had intended for her, the income from a property in Wiltshire that would have been modest but sufficient. He expressed his regret in language that made it clear he felt none. Sophia wrote back in a single sentence, I acknowledge your letter and its contents. She did not pursue it. She did not weep over it. She folded the copy she had kept and put it in the back of the small leather case where she was keeping the documents relating to the case. And she told herself that it was useful to know exactly what she was working with. Honoria, growing bold, began appearing at Lionel's side at private dinners, not at public events, not yet, but at the smaller, more intimate gatherings, where the people who mattered were assembled, and where being seen on his arm was a statement rather than an accident. The alliance met and debated a chancery petition. Mr. Ashford laid out the case for it carefully and thoroughly. James listened with his elbows on the table and his hands folded under his chin. And when Ashford finished, James said, A courtroom will turn Sophia into spectacle. The papers will report the testimony. The narrative will be that she fought her way into a court of law to reclaim an engagement she lost. That is not the story we want told. What story do we want told? Sophia asked. The true one, the dowager said. In the room where it will land hardest. She looked at them both. A private dinner at Ashbourne House, the family assembled, the evidence presented in person. Lionel forced to choose his side in front of his mother, his cousin, and the woman he agreed to deceive. She paused. He will not hold under that. He has never had to hold under anything. The dinner was set for the following Tuesday. The night before it, Sophia could not stay in Hampstead. She told herself she was going to Bond Street to retrieve a document from the small sitting room above the tea shop where James had been working through the final organization of the letters and testimony. This was true. It was not the whole truth. She found him at the table with 3 stacks of papers and a candle that had burned down to a stub. He looked up when she came in, and something in his expression told her that he had been expecting her, or something like her. Not the intrusion, but the need behind it. She sat down across from him and said, "I cannot do it." He set down his pen. "I will weep," she said. "I will say something cruel and specific, and I will regret the cruelty later, and by then it will be too late. I will lose my nerve at exactly the moment when losing it costs the most." She looked at the table. "I have spent 10 years building a composure that is apparently entirely unreliable when it is most required." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You may say whatever you need to say. You may weep. You may be cruel. You may say the wrong thing." He looked at her steadily. "I will be in the room. That is what I am telling you. Whatever happens, I will be in the room." She looked at him. She thought of the steadiness of his hand when she had not been steady. She thought of the pen he turned over when he was thinking, and the way he sat forward rather than back, and the fact that he had told her the truth about the contested succession in a room where he had not been required to, and the fact that 6 weeks ago she had not known his name. Her head came to rest against his shoulder. She was not certain afterward which of them had moved, only that it had happened without announcement or ceremony, and that his arm came around her, and that they remained that way until the candle guttered and the room went dark, and neither of them stirred for a long time after that. 6 weeks after the engagement ball, Sophia arrived at Ashbourne House in a hired carriage at 7:30 in the evening. The house was lit. The drawing-room windows glowed from the street. She had been here before. She had walked these rooms during the engagement season, had stood at these windows, had sat at this table. But it was a different house now. She knew things about it that she had not known then, and the knowing changed the proportions of every room. The family was assembled as the dowager had arranged. Lionel was at the head of the table, and he looked, Sophia thought, like a man who had been told this was a reconciliation supper and was beginning to suspect it was not. Honoria was seated to his right, a position she had not been placed in by the hostess, but had taken herself, which was, Sophia noted, very much in keeping. James was across the table, his face composed. The dowager presided at the far end with the specific stillness of a woman who has decided what the evening will cost and has already paid it in advance. There were 3 servants at the wall. The food was served. The conversation was careful and almost entirely without content. Sophia ate. She did not look at Honoria. She looked at the candles and the wine in her glass and the particular way the firelight moved across the ceiling. And she thought about nothing at all, which was a skill she developed in the last 6 weeks and which she was grateful for now. Halfway through the second course, Honoria turned to her. "Poor dear," Honoria said. The tone was the one from Bond Street, the one with pity on the surface and something entirely different underneath. "You look so tired. I do hope you have been resting properly." Sophia set down her glass. The room was not quiet. The fire was crackling. A servant moved at the sideboard. But it became quiet in the way that rooms become quiet when something is about to happen that cannot be undone. James, across the table, did not move. The dowager did not move. Lionel looked at his plate. Sophia looked at Honoria. "I saw you," she said, "on the night of the engagement ball, from the terrace. The lanterns were lit along the south hedge, and the gravel was pale, and there was no question of what I was looking at." Her voice was steady. "I saw Lionel's hand on your back. I saw the flower fall from your hair. I have known that laugh of yours since we were 8 years old, Honoria, and I heard it from the terrace, and I knew exactly what it meant." Honoria's expression did not change. She said, "Sophia, you were upset and you misread." The footman's name is Greer, Sophia said. He was paid £8 on the morning after the ball. The payment came from your personal account, and it was made 3 days before the evening, which means you placed him in that garden before you knew whether I would go onto the terrace at all. Which means you knew I would, because you know me, and you knew that I go outside when the rooms become too loud, because I have done it at every large gathering since we were girls. She felt her voice shift, not break, not yet, but move toward something she could not entirely govern. You planned it, not because you lost your head and made a mistake. You planned it so I would see, so I would leave. So the story would be that the unstable bride fled in the night and you could step into her place within the year. Honoria said, "This is—" "The housekeeper's name is Mrs. Farrow," Sophia said. "She has been in this house for 30 years. She found your slipper in Lionel's dressing room on the morning of the 3rd of November. She has told the dowager's solicitor what she found and when she found it." Her voice broke on the word November. Broke cleanly like a line snapping under weight. And she did not stop. "There are 2 housemaids who can place you at this house on the 14th of September, the 2nd of October, and the 28th of October. All dates on which you told your mother you were in the country. And there are letters. 22 months of them. Your name in his handwriting. His name in yours." She was shaking. She was aware of it. Aware that her hands were not still, and her voice was not entirely under her control. And she did not stop. "I have spent 3 months telling myself I was being ungenerous. I have spent 3 months suspecting what I saw, and attributing it to my own anxiety and my own history and my own particular talent for expecting the worst. I was not being ungenerous. I was not misreading. I was right, and I knew I was right. And I let you make me doubt it, and I will not do that again." The room was entirely silent now. Honoria had gone very still. Lionel was looking at the table. The servants at the wall were not looking at anything. The dowager rose from her chair. She crossed the room to Sophia, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the deliberate, unhurried movement of a woman who has decided precisely what she is doing. And she took Sophia's hand in both of hers. She held it in front of her son, in front of Honoria, in front of 3 servants who would carry this evening out of the room with them and into the world. "This is my daughter now," the dowager said. Her voice was clear and entirely even. "The other 2 will leave this house tonight." Lionel said, "Mother." The dowager turned to him. She did not raise her voice. She said, "You have one chance, in this moment, to be your own man, to acknowledge what you have done, to release this woman from any further obligation to you, and to conduct yourself with what remains of your dignity." She held his gaze. "I am telling you plainly that this is not it." He went silent. He looked at his mother for a long moment, and then he looked away. James stood. He came around the table to Sophia's side and offered her his arm. She took it. Her hand was still unsteady, and she did not try to hide it. The dowager released her other hand and stepped back, and the 3 of them walked to the door together, Sophia, James, the dowager. And behind them, Honoria sat very still in her chair, and Lionel did not rise. The hall was cold after the warmth of the dining room. Sophia's breath came out in a small cloud. She was still shaking, and she did not speak, and James did not speak either. And the dowager walked ahead to give instructions to the footman. And Sophia stood in the hall of Ashbourne House and felt, for the first time in 6 weeks, that the floor was entirely solid beneath her. She slept 3 hours. When she woke, The light through the curtains at the dowager's house was the particular pale gold of early morning in late winter, and she lay in it for a while and thought about nothing, which was easier than it had ever been. James came at 9. She heard his voice in the hall below, and then heard Mrs. Prentice. She had returned to Hampstead, which still felt like the right place. Tell him that Lady Sophia was in the garden. He found her on the path between the bare rose beds, her coat buttoned against the cold, her hands in her pockets. "Will you walk with me?" he asked. They walked. The garden was small and quiet, and the gravel was damp from the previous night's frost. Halfway down the path, Sophia stopped. "I need to ask you something," she said. Plainly. "Ask it," he said. "The last 6 weeks," she said, "were they a campaign for you, or were they something else?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he closed the distance between them, and he put both hands at the sides of her face, and he kissed her, once, slowly, with a care that was not tentativeness, but something more deliberate. And then he said, with his hands still where they were, "I have been certain since the second meeting. I have been waiting for the case to be finished, so that nothing I said could be mistaken for the heat of the moment." She kissed him back. The garden was cold and quiet around them, and the morning light came through the bare branches, and neither of them was in any hurry. In the weeks that followed, the matrons who had excluded Sophia from her charitable committee found themselves, in rapid succession, without the Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne's support for 3 separate philanthropic endeavors they had been relying on. The reinstatement was proposed, seconded, and carried by unanimous vote at the next meeting. Sophia attended the meeting after that and chaired it. Her uncle wrote to her with an apology that occupied 2 full pages and contained the word "misguided" 4 times. She read it once and did not reply. Honoria departed for the continent in the 2nd week of March. Lionel wrote his mother a single letter. The Dowager received it, set it on her desk, and had not yet answered it by the time the spring came. James proposed in the library of his Surrey estate on a Wednesday afternoon in April, standing in front of the window with the light behind him, without any preparation or ceremony at all. He said, "I would like to marry you. I am asking plainly because I think you prefer plainness, and because I have had enough of saying things sideways to last me the rest of my life." Sophia said, "Yes," plainly. The wedding was small. The Dowager attended and sat in the front row and cried with a composure that suggested she had been practicing. Mr. Ashford attended and did not cry, and shook James's hand with both of his. Mrs. Prentice wore a hat with an extravagant feather, and said afterward that it had been the most satisfying morning she had spent in years. 3 months on, at James's estate in Surrey, the library at dusk held a low fire and 2 people, and the comfortable silence of a room that had been lived in long enough to know its occupants. Sophia closed the small writing desk under the window, where she had been working through a long postponed correspondence. James closed the ledger. He put out the lamp. The house went quiet around them. In the morning, the light came through the curtains in long pale bars across the bed. There were 2 cups of tea on a single tray on the bedside table, still steaming. On the window seat, in a small white bowl that had not been there the night before, sat 1 flower. Small, white, the same kind that had fallen from Honoria's hair onto the pale gravel of a garden path 6 months ago on the night that had changed everything. He had placed it there before she woke. She saw it when she sat up, and she looked at it for a long moment. And then she looked at him, and neither of them needed to say what it meant. Some things, she had learned, were better carried forward than left where they fell.